The Rebbe gave each person the kuntres and said to them, Hatzlocha d'ken lenin. He said, Hatzlocha d'ken lenin. Now, I was a boy. I was a bocher. A big bocher, but I was a bocher. What was I thinking at the time? When I was a child growing up, I remember my father told me many times, and of course I've heard this from others as well, that many years before the Rebbe used to give mashke simchas Torah. Chartok, along with the niggin. The niggin was with the mashke. And the reason the Rebbe gave for giving mashke was that you were making an increase in nigla or chsidis. And the Rebbe complained many times that they're not taking him seriously. One year, the Rebbe actually asked if the year before you did your Yisafa. And a year that mir gesagt, personally, he was in line, and he saw that the Rebbe was asking each person if they made a Yisafa from last year, so he got out of the line. And what bothered them, they brought little kids, 6-year-olds, and the Rebbe said, "Du gehst lernen Chassidus?" The Rebbe was giving, so they took. And the Rebbe was not happy that people were coming and taking in a way that was showing that they were not regarding the terms. So Chavdalit, the year before the Rebbe Tzachana passed away, the Rebbe was very upset. That was the year that the Rebbe asked every person if they they kept the Achot from the year before. The Rebbe also taught two Negunim. And the Rebbe said then, what's going to be next year we don't know. He lost his mother Vav Tishrei, understand? So when it came to Simchas Torah, the Rebbe was an oval. And the Rebbe's halacha salavelis, I mean the Tafshach Chavhei, the way the Rebbe behaved in Adar, the Chavhei was not long. The Rebbe was not going to fabring, which is kislev. On the one hand, he fabringed every Shabbos for his mother. But during the week, the Rebbe felt halachically he's a novel, he's not going to make a fabrengen, so I'm a sibuk from Simcha. So the story, again, I wasn't born, but I heard that Reb Shmuel was a mahus. Shmuel got a few chassidim, they went into the Rebbe in private. They didn't do it in public. And they told the Rebbe must bring it to Kislev. So the Rebbe listened to them, but he made a siyum. Every time the Rebbe bring during the week of Tafshach Chavhei was a siyum Masechta. Did you imagine? It was an Ibayot all of a sudden. It was gepacked. Tafshach Chavhei was one of the most rich years. The Rashi Sicha started, then every single Shabbos was the Fabrengen. And every week they Fabrengen. You'd Kislev, you'd Shvatas anyways, a siyum Masechta. Purim, Yud Besamuz, the Rebbe Fabrengt for the end of Shloishim, I think. No, for the end of Amiras Kaddish. Hey Menachemov was the end of Kaddish because there was two others. Every week the Fabrengen was a siyum Masechta. But the Rebbe didn't teach Negunim anymore. So when the Rebbe said that he's only giving to boys over 12 and girls over 11, that's what I was thinking at the time. But the Rebbe said, I'm not giving it to people who can't learn it. But that was the only time the Rebbe did that. The next time the Rebbe gave a kuntris, if I am not wrong, was Erev Rosh Hashanah Tovshim and Chestem and Tes. Where the Rebbe gave the Kitzurim Va'aris Sefer Tanya, the blue one. And the Rebbe gave it to everybody. And Noshim V'taf. The Rebbe was a novel. The Rebbe was saying Kaddish to the Rebbe. He wasn't a novel, he was saying Kaddish to the Rebbe. So what I want to share, now that you mentioned it, that there's different hanhogis by the Rebbe. And I suppose you could say that the ultimate hanhoga by the Rebbe is what the Rebbe calls hakel. I mean, hakel is a pasuk in Chumash. Hakel is one of the Tayag mitzvahs. But the Rebbe created hakel. You know, the hakel that we're going to have when Mashiach comes is going to be the Rebbe's hakel. Why? It's not one day. It's shnas hakel, a whole year of hakel. And hakel means, the Rebbe said, a father is a king in his home, and a teacher is a king in his classroom, and the principal is a king in his school, and so on. And a melech has to speak, to make hakel, get everybody together, and you have to speak things that bring to you the Shemayim. And hakel is a very unusual component. And noshim v'taf. There's no separation. Hakel and an alaglaich, even pu'utes, even newborns are included in hakel. Because you're speaking to the neshama, you're not speaking to the seichel. So the Rebbe gave the kuntis chof marchesh memches, the kuntis hecholzu. The Rebbe gave it to limud, and every person who got it, the Rebbe said hatzlacha d'ken lenin. Each person, the Rebbe told me hatzlacha d'ken lenin. He gave it upstairs where he gave dollars. But the next kuntis, there were no conditions. And the Rebbe gave it to babies. So what's a newborn going to do with a contest? The Teretz is he's going to grow up. And now those babies are over 30. And those babies are either over 30 or close to 30. And they're in a strong position to learn what the Rebbe gives. Okay, so let's do. But Rabbi said, we're learning Pei as well in Tanya. We started last week, and we're in the middle. Okay? And we're holding the line that begins with the words Ubebeinene yesh gamken shtei madreges. That means it's page Chof Amud Beis, which will be page 40, with 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Let's start from this. Last week's class, we learned last Sunday, was about words a lot. I want to start from a place which will, it's not a natural place to start, but it's a place to help us be clear about the sugya. One of the things that Al Rebbe spoke about last week in our Shir was the difference between the word Eved and the word Oived. Eved means a slave, and the Oived means a slaver, for lack of words. Or if you want to be nice, Eved means a servant, and an Oived means one who was serving. And of course, these two forms you have in every noun, right? You have a Melech and a Moilech, a king and one who kings. You have a Chochom and a Mischakim, one who is wise and one who is creating intuitive wisdom. What's the difference? The difference is one is a Shema Toyar and the other is a Shema Pa'ula. One describes a person and the other describes an activity. If a simple person comes up with an original idea, he's not a Chochom, he's a Mischakim. A creative man or woman whose inyan is to be Mechadash Chedushim, who's sleeping or eating or taking a walk, is a Chochom. Because there's a very big difference, if you remember how we explained it last year, I've been talking about Salat for the last few months. This is not, this is saying the Sikh, this is my own Agdoris. There's being somebody that's doing something. Being somebody is a great Zach. Doing something anybody can do. And this is the Rebbe's holding him. So we'll give a gleiche Zach, it would be nice if we were a somebody. But l'chal hapachas we should do something, and that's the difference between the word Eved and the word Oived. Eved is a state of existence. Oived is an activity. Some people have achieved in their relationship with the Eibishter that they're called an Eved, a slave, a servant. A servant of Hashem is a servant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. He's an Eved of the Eibishter. I have to tell you a story. I was in Florida 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, Tafshin Ayin Tes. And it was a Fabrengen in the yeshiva there, and they invited me, but they also invited the whole Kehillah. And they invited Harav Avram Kort, he's quite a few years older than my father. He's not young. So he's a soldier. I mean, he's a general. He's one of our generals. He won a shlichus in Tafshin Chafalef, 1961. And he sat at the Fabrengen the whole night. And I was paid to Fabrengen, he did most of the Fabrengen. I actually took all of the pieces that he spoke and I separated the rest of Fabrengen and I made a recording just of him. If you want, I can send it to you. He Fabrengen, he had a very good time. He sat till 1 o'clock in the Harav Avram Kor. And he talked, he said, you're sitting next to somebody who's a giant, it's not comfortable, you have to just know your place. So he talked about himself and going on Shlichus, it doesn't matter the detail, just want to say one word that he said. He said, Shlichus is a simple thing. 24 hours. That's all the simple thing. What Shlichus? 24 hours. The story that he told was that he wanted to go on Shlichus, and he was offered a job to be a Malamed and a Teda. A Teda in those days was the Besiris Nefesh, it was Kama school, but the Rebbe wanted a Teda. We see what a Teda is now, but then a Teda was having a very, very hard time. So, he didn't want to go to be Malamed and a Teda, because he was afraid that it would jeopardize the possibility of becoming a Shliach. And he told it to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe told him, das ist dein zeitweilige Shlichus. This is your temporary Shlichus. So in his mind, a Teda became a Shlichus. So he tells a story of what kind of a Malamed he was. If you're a Malamed 24 hours and the 7 days in a week, Shlichus is always. My own feelings are not important. But the point is, this is a Jew who lives this for the last 60 years. This is his life. He's a shliach. 20 of his whole mitzvah is a shliach. So an alto vod from Chassidim, it's a machzedek at achosim. It's a machzedek at achosim, who was a malamed by profession, and he was so thin you could see through him. He was going to. So the Tzemach Tzedek said about him, "Funem is gar nicht geblieben normal." There's nothing left of this person, just normal. So Eved, that's Eved. Eved, his mitzias is that he's a servant. Eved is a servant when he sleeps. Like Rabbi used to say, a soldat, a soldier, when he's asleep, he's a soldier. And then there's an Eved. An Eved is somebody who's servant. He's working very, very hard. But an Eved is not an Eved, the Rebbe says. An Eved is somebody who is, for lack of words, be'emtza ha'avodah. I think the Rebbe uses that word. Be'emtza ha'avodah. He's in the middle of the work. And it's conceivable that he'll never finish the work. But you cannot call him an Eved. Yeah, be'emtza, the Rebbe uses be'emtza ha'avodah. You cannot call him an Eved. Because an Eved is not describing an activity. An Eved is describing a person. Eved is describing an activity. And the Alter Rebbe admits, this is the only time in Tanya that Alter Rebbe makes this admission. He says, it's the only place in Tanya that Alter Rebbe says, if you're looking inside, on page 40, page 40, in Pedic Tes Vos, he says, Shehu be'emes avoida v'omo, how many lines into the Pedic? 3, 6, 7 lines into the Pedic. This is Alter Rebbe's words. Shehu be'emes, to be true, this is avoida v'omo godel. This is a work and a great exertion. Lilochem beitomit, to fight with the Torah all the time, and he finishes v'hainu a-beinani. A beinani cannot be called an Eved. Because a beinani is not defined by who he is, he's defined by what he's doing. And every day it's a new fight, every minute it's a new fight. A tzaddik is defined by Eved. Eved. Because Eved means that he's very garsheyo v'yelech v'legamri. He has no yetzer hara. He's achieved a status that when he sleeps he's a slave. Because service is not only something that he does, service is something that he has become. He's a mitzvah of an Eved. So a beinani is called Eved, and a tzaddik is called Eved. So the Alter Rebbe points out, this is why when you use the word Eved, you accompany it with the word Havaya. Eved Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu is called Eved Hashem. Shem Havaya. When you talk about Oved, you use the word Elokim, because it's a lower level. You understand that Oved is a person who's not defined by who he is, by what he's doing. So his relationship with godliness is an inyan from concealment. So this is called Oved Elokim, one who is in the serving Elokim, and the other is an already established slave, a knecht from Shem Havaya. That's how the Alter Rebbe presented. Now, of course, you understand that I'm reconstructing the Pedic to create a new form. I'm saying it in a different way than it says inside, because I want to make it clear, and also because I want to say it a little bit different. But this is what we learned last week. And on this basis, the Alter Rebbe tells us that Eved is a tzaddik, or Oved is a beinani. And therefore, when it says in the Pasuk, you should return and you should examine. Bein tzaddik la rasha, what separates a tzaddik from a rasha. Bein Oved Elokim la asher lo yavodoi, between one who is an Oved who's serving Shem Elokim versus one who is not serving Shem Elokim. You cannot say that they're synonyms. You cannot say, like I told you last week, the lashon you have a lot of mafarshim, kofel devara b'milim shonim. Tzaddik is not Oved Elokim, and Rosh is not Lo Yavodah. They're two different things. Like I explained to you last week at length, that in many madregas of learning Torah, you will find that the Chazal will say, that the Yishonim will say, that psukim are poetic. If they say the same thing 2 times, or even more than 2 times, they mean the same thing. It's just being said twice or 3 times for the purposes of the shir, of the rhyme. But when you go into higher levels of Torah, that all falls away, and every letter is precise. So on a superficial level, Tzaddik and Rasha is Eved Elokim and Layavadeh, and the Alter Rebbe says, no, it's not. Tzaddik and Rasha means Tzaddik and Beinani. And Eved Elokim and Layavadeh means 2 types of Beinanis, 2 different things. Because the Tzaddik is the type Eved Hashem. He's achieved the status where he's in a condition of being a servant of the Eibishter. Eved Hashem is an Eved Hashem when he is asleep. I've told you the story many times, and I don't know if I told it to you in this round. We had learned Pedicure, the Hidei whether I told it to you, but this is a story that I tell you from time to time. There's a chassid, so it says on the first page of the Tanya, all the world, but Olam was in hell. Tells you you're a tzaddik, you shouldn't believe them, you should be in your eyes Kir Rasha, and of course the Alter Rebbe's whole word in Tanya that Kir Rasha doesn't mean a bad person, it means a Beinani. Kir Rasha Shamagir Leikamaiser Shoyim. So if someone tells you you're a tzaddik, you shouldn't believe him. But only if that someone is part of Olam. What if you're told by another tzaddik or by a Rebbe that you're holding a Madregas tzaddik? That's a different story. So I saw in the Rishime, Mistam, it's now printed in the Sefer, as the Rebbe Maharash said to the great Chosed Radatz, the David Hirsch friend, it was Hirschel darauf, yeah? Es ist Zeit zu trachten wegen Avedes HaTzadikim. Ad kan l'shen HaKodesh. The Rebbe Maharash said to one of his Chassidim, he's been by the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, he was a younger man, by the Rebbe Maharash, he was in his middle years. The Radatz had Alichas Yomim. He passed away during the lifetime of the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was 86. He was 86 years old. The Radatz was told by the Rebbe Maharash, quote, it's time to think about the work of a tzaddik. He was Madregas tzaddik. And tzaddik's avodah is very different than Beinani's avodah. Now, I'm not a tzaddik. I'm not a Beinani, I'm embarrassed to say. But it's a Madregas tzaddik, I don't understand it. But one of the things about Madregas tzaddik, which is obvious, there's much more expected of him. But the fear of an Aveda like we have, he doesn't have. Because he's gone over from the word Oived, attached to the name of Lakim, to the word Eved, which is attached to the name of Avaya. There's much more expected of a tzaddik. But it's a different Avodah, it's a different kind of work. The Beinani is not an Eved, he's an Oived. And he's fighting every minute of every day, the fight never finishes, because he's not becoming the fight. He's doing the fight. It will become the fight, that's Madregas Tzaddik, it's called Eved. So long as he's not becoming the fight, and he's doing the fight, it never stops, and it never ends, and it's called Eved Elokim. So the Alter Rebbe brings this pasuk, and he brings the Gemara, that explains the difference that Tzaddik and Rasha means one thing, and Eved Elokim and Asher Layavad, they mean something else. What does the Gemara say? We haven't learned the Gemara yet. We're going to learn the Gemara later. The Gemara says that the difference is between somebody who learns something 100 times versus somebody who learns something 101 times. You'll see it later in the page. Now, the Rebbe brings Mashal Mashuk Shal Chamorim from the Gemara. I thought it's the Gemara Masech the Kedushin, but it's not. It's a Gemara in Masech the Chagigah. Yeah, I made a mistake. That it's not, I thought it's not. It's Masech the Chagigah. That a person, in those days, people made a living with donkeys. They had a herd of donkeys, a stade ezelin, a whole herd of donkeys, and these donkeys would carry a load. Each donkey had a certain amount it was able to carry, whatever it was, 100 pounds, 200 pounds. So if you had to ship something that was very heavy, you would hire a person who had donkeys, and you paid him for the donkey. 10 donkeys costed so much, 20 donkeys costed so much, 30 donkeys, and they would bring it from place to place, the equivalent of a truck today, on the backs of the donkeys, chamorim. And there was a standard presumption of distance per day. Every day they went 10 pas. The 10 pas is 40 mil. My suspicion is that a mil is a kilometer. So you're talking 40 mil is 40 kilometer. It's about 30 miles a day, a little bit more maybe. That's a normal day. What if you were in a rush? So the donkey people had to get up by Aleis HaShacher instead of an Eitz HaChama, which is an hour and a quarter, 72 minutes for an Eitz HaChama, and they would stay out from Shkir to Eitz HaChavim, Eitz HaYetzer, Adon L'Fol, Eiva L'Avedas, Yadei Oref. And if you started early and you finished late, so you can go a greater distance, you have to pay more. But the increased payment was not proportionate. If you paid a Sara Pasa B'Zuzah, if a regular day's journey was $100, to go one more parsa, to go 1/10 more was the basis. You paid double. The extra 10%, you didn't pay 10% more, you paid 100% more. Why? Because there was Yossi Midigilusim. There was a normal habit, there was a way that these people did their schlepping, If you want them to schlep even a small distance more, you have to pay them much more because it was more than their head. So the Gemara brings this idea that Eved Elikim is Sheine Pirke Meir Pamim V'Achas. Eved Elikim learns Torah 101 times. La Yavadei is a Beinoni who's only Sheine Pirke Meir Pamim 100 times, and they bring the muscle from schlepping a normal distance, the normal distance versus schlepping the load a little bit more than the normal distance. In other words, Eved Elikim means Beinoni, and La Yavadei also means Beinoni, because there's two inyanim in a Beinoni. Eved means not Eved. That's the key. Eved means that he's asleep is also an Eved. Eved is not defined by his vasari, nor vasartut. An Eved is defined by his actions, not by his mahus. He's not achieved the status of Eved Avai. He's only Eved Elikim, and he's defined by the work that he does. Nevertheless, there's two madregas, and the magic words are Yeser Mirigilus. This is a new concept. There's a Beinoni, and there's a Beinoni who's pushing himself. A Beinoni who's not pushing himself is called Lo Yavadai, and a Beinoni who is pushing himself to Avadai. When you go beyond your comfort zone, when you go beyond what you're normal, it's called Avadai. It's called Yeser Mirigiluse, more than your habit, and it qualifies you as Avadai. L'cha'eda, the connection to the previous Pedic, is this is the idea of Hitzadik, that the Beinoni is expected to do the Avodah of the Hitzadik, even though he's a Beinoni. He's supposed to develop feelings in his heart to hate evil and to love good, like the Alter Rebbe said in the end of the previous Pedic. And it shows itself in this, not just am I a Beinoni, but I'm pushing. I have to tell you on the Snagdisha Meis. Ich muss euch erzählen am Meis. Forgive me. Ich weiß nicht nicht. If I didn't think it was inappropriate, so I wouldn't tell it. I have a friend, a classmate. He was sitting Shiva. So I went from Menachem. Naturally, I wasn't the only person. There were other people there. There was Adam Choshev. Nicht Kalabavich. I learned from Lubavitch Pesach. Adam Choshev, I don't remember his name. Really, Adam Choshev. He's related to Slavins and Karp, Mishpacha Slavin and Karp. Mrs. Karp, who just passed away, she's a Slavin from home. They're saying Kaddish for her. My friend is Slavin. So it's Reichman Ayid, Eilam Meshidid. He learned to Lubavitch 70 years ago. He's a Eilam Meshidid. You can see he's a Adam Choshev. He was a Yossi. He had no father. He was raised by his mother. And Rabbi Avram Karp from Montreal was his uncle. I don't remember how. Was a Karp. And he was very connected to Avram Karp. He had no money. Even a Yossi. So he learned in different yeshivas. And Avram Karp would look after him. He would go into, when he came to New York, he'd go into the Rosh Yeshiva and was der Macht. Avram Karp was a big Talmud Chacham. He was living in Chaim Berlin. The Yeshiva Chaim Berlin was Rav Yitzchak Kutner. He had a very fun relationship with Lubavitch. He knew the Rebbe personally. He learned Chassidus with the Rebbe, but he was really not a friend. It was a love-hate relationship, I would say. And Rabbi Avram Karp would come into the yeshiva anytime he came to New York to be with the Rebbe. He would go into the yeshiva, and he would ask the Rosh Yeshiva was der Macht. Usually, these conversations would turn into a discussion, which turned into an argument, and then they would ask this little boy to scream, and they were screaming at each other. They said, and Lubavitch, Avram Karp was defending the Rebbe. This happens for Kama Shonim. I don't know how many years. Whenever Avram Karp came, he would leave him money. This boy wasn't paying schalim. He couldn't afford tuition. The yeshiva, B'chlal yeshiva in those days, the yeshivas raised money for kids to learn Torah. The yeshiva supported him. He had no money. And his uncle his uncle was on the Lamed Tzachak. Avram Karp was broke himself. And he would bring him, every time he came, something. It wasn't tuition, it was something. Anyway, one time he comes, and he leaves him a check, a bigger schub. So Harav Hutner says to him, I know that you're a Malamed, and you have a family of children of your own. This is beyond your means. So Rabbi Karp says to him, Alav Shalom, Ayid Asachan Shrengim. Ayid Asachan Shrengim. A Jew has to exert himself. So this man is telling a story about Rabbi Hutner. Rabbi Hutner hated the dais. He hated the idea of a bunch of gedolim sit on that stage and everyone takes a turn making a speech. He had no patience for it. If he was the Reish HaMadabrim, it's good. To sit with a bunch of people and take turns giving each other cover, he had no patience for it. He had no patience for it at all. There was a Psachtidish Rebbe who was making him a lot of malke. He said the names, I don't remember the names. The story happened in the 50s, Mistana. In the 50s. late 50s, mid 50s, I don't know when. Some Rebbe was opening up a shtibel, and he invited Rabbi Hutner to come and be there by the Chanukah Zabayis. He was interested in being a Chanukah Zabayis like he was interested in being on Pluto. He had no interest in it. Anyway, Rabbi Avram Karp visits him Thursday night, and he gives him this larger amount of money, and and he tells him, "Ayid das lechan streng, ayid das lechan streng." Okay, and the Eibush go from that Shabbos was a blizzard. It was 1.5 foot of snow on the ground. Motzei Shabbos, Rabbi Hutner says to his Talmidim, "Go dig out the car. I have to go to the Malav Malka." Every 15 minutes, he was like a nervous wreck. "No, you ready to go?" And because he got into the car, he went to this Malav Malka. He sat there. He gave cover. Then was given cover. He came home. The next day, the two Bochrim would took him, come over to this boy. Said, "This is all your fault." He says, "What do I have to do with it?" He says, "Rabbi Hutner hates to go to these events." The whole time he's sitting in the car and he's muttering to himself, "Ayid das lechan stregen, ayid das lechan stregen." It's a sweet story. I think it's a very sweet story. He told him a few days, in other words, Rabbi Karp ruined his weekend, you understand? Rabbi Karp gave him money that he Pasha didn't have. And it got to him. So when somebody asked him for a taiva, anyway, this is a story, I have to share it. I'm sure when I heard it, I told it to you. But this is a story that has a toich. Anyway, Ad Kan Maimer Amuzgir. So this is what Alter Rebbe now presents us with. Since we know by Beinani the concept of the Hit Tzaddik, in other words, the idea that a Bein that's Honstreng, a Beinani is supposed to be a Balabais over himself, and we know that there's two levels in Beinani, Madregas Beinani, Midas Beinani. But we also know that whatever kind of Beinani you are given two oaths, two shuas. Tehit tzaddik, v'al tirosh. Be righteous, don't be evil. For most people, most neshamas, I should say, the realistic part of the shua is the al tirosh, not the tehit tzaddik. Because we're not tzaddikim, and we're not going to become tzaddikim. The Rebbe says in the beginning of Perek Lamed Hey. Yeah, but you have a avodah from time to time to push yourself. Ayid das lechan streng. In other words, there's a need for a person to also do tehit tzaddik and not to satisfy himself with al tehit rasha. So the Rebbe says this segues into this Gemara that there's tzaddik and beinani. That's one issue, and then there's beinani and beinani. That's another issue. What separates beinani from beinani? Oyved elikim and layavada. They're both be'emtza ha'avois. They're both in the middle of the work, and they both have a yetzer hara. And for both of them, the Alter Rebbe admits but one is strengt sich nicht an, one is not exerting himself, and the other is. The one who is exerting himself is called Oived, and the one who's not exerting himself is called Lo Yavad. And in the Gemara, it says, the Oived is the one who learns Gemara 101 times. Because you'll see later inside, the minig was that everything that they did in those days, they would learn 100 times. Because there were no surah. Everything was Baal Peh. They were not allowed to write down Teresh Baal Peh. So everything had to be put to memory. So in order to make sure you remember it, you never forgot it, they were supposed to review everything 100 times. And a person does 101 times, it's a little bit more. Ma'at yesem minigilusa, just a little bit more than his habit. This is called Oived. This is called Ayit HaSechon Gestrengt. Or in the language of the last Perek, this is the symptom of the Tehit Tzaddik. When the Beinani does not suffice with controlling his actions and his words, and his thoughts, but he adds also a certain feeling, even if it's for a minute, a feeling of being mayas b'ra, hating evil, and a feeling of being loving the Eibishter, which is a Madregas Tzaddik. This is the source and the cause of the 101st time, of the Yesem and Yelusay. That makes him an Oived Elokim. So we're talking about Beinani. They're both Beinani. But one Beinani has an element of, I have to go out of myself, I have to go beyond myself. Whatever I'm in, I have to go beyond it, because this is what the Tehit Tzaddik half of the Shua mandate. And the other one is not doing the Tehit Tzaddik half of the Shua, he's only doing the Al Tehit Rasha half of the Shua. And it's possible that a person who's doing the Al Tehit Rasha half of the Shua is not going beyond, strengt sich nicht an, he's not going beyond himself, so he's called Lo Yavad. Questions or comments? So we're reading inside Rabbi Yossi, okay? Ubebeinani. It is that Chos Amud Beis, page 40. It's 7 lines to the bottom of the page. It says the Alter Rebbe Ubebeinani Yesh Gam Kein Shtei Madregas. The Beinani has 2 steps. Eved Elikim, the Beinani who is on a level of serving Hashem as an Eved. Va'asher Layavada, one who's not serving Him. And both of these are not called Eved, they're called Oved. They're not slaves, they're slaving. They're not servants, they're servants. Because their association with the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, again, to use the Yiddish cliche, it's nicht sein Nepes, it's to Nepes. To be a somebody is a very high madreg. To do a something is shaykhs to every person. The Beinani is doing a something, but if he's not going beyond himself, he's called Lo Yavode. And the Beinani who is going beyond himself, which means he's mobilizing, he's drawing from the other half of the Shavua that says Tehid Tzaddik, he is called Avodah. And the Alter Rebbe is now going to explain. We're talking about 2 Beinanis. One Beinani is called Avodah. The second Beinani is called Lo Avodah. Neither of them are Tzaddik. Because there would be a Tzaddik, they would be called Eved. But neither of them are Rasha either. Because Alter Rebbe says something remarkable. It's possible for a Yid to have a Yetzer Hara and not to fight with his Yetzer Hara and never to do an Aved. It's theoretically possible for a person to have a Yetzer Hara and not to struggle with the Yetzer Hara and to be a Beinani without struggle. What are the odds? Quite small, yeah? But he's going to say 3 statements. The Alter Rebbe is going to tell us 3 things. Okay? The first one is, I'm going to tell it to you first Baal Peh, and then I'm going to tell it to you inside, okay? The first one is, Masmid Bilimudei B'Tivei. It's on page Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, second line from the top of page 41. Masmid Bilimudei B'Tivei. If a person is naturally diligent, what they call in our culture a bookworm, but we have to find a kosher representation of the worm, yeah? Even though Yid not called Telas Yankiv, of a worm is not kosher. So the first characteristic is called Masmid Bilimudei B'Tivei. 2 lines later it says Mitzunan B'Tivei, a person who's naturally cold. Okay? And then the line after that it says Mechusir Hergish Hanoah B'Tivei. These are 3 possibilities in the nature of a person. The word nature, the word teva, Biklal is associated with klippa. This is the teva of this person's personality. This is not about avodah. It's not about alakus. It's what he is. So again, I'm going to read it one more time. For not to have a fight, you have to have all 3 together. If you have 1 or 2 out of the 3, so you can have certain fights, yes, certain fights, no. So the second line from the top, you have the first characteristic. Masmid Bilimudei B'Tivei is naturally diligent. I'm going to learn this inside with him, just showing you the words. The second one is 2 lines later. Mitzunan B'Tivei, he's by naturally a dispassionate person. He's not a hot person. And the next line reads, Mechusir Hergish Hanoah B'Tivei, which means he's not a Baltaiva. He's not one of those people who needs to have pleasure all the time. If you have these 3 characteristics together, you could be a Beinani with a Yetzer Hara and never fight, called Lo Yavode. If you have 1 of the characteristics or 2 of the characteristics, so certain fights you're not going to have, but you'll have other fights. And the crowd, that's how most people are. Not everybody was given, just like you don't have a full Yetzer Tev, Nefshalakis, people have different Nefesh HaBahamitsin. And that's why sometimes we don't understand each other. What one person finds to be so challenging, another person finds to be no big deal. The one person finds to be no big deal, another person finds to be very big challenge. Why? Because you see here that there's 3 areas in the Nefesh HaBahamit. And you could be successful in one and not successful in the other 2. Why? Because the Eibush took away your Muhammad. If you have all 3 together, you're called Lo Yavode. And Alter Rebbe uses this as a platform to introduce us to the idea that it's possible to be a Beinani and not be fighting anymore. He said in other words, it's possible to be a Beinani and you're called Lo Yavode because you're not fighting with yourself. Now I told you before that the Zayah that you're fighting with yourself is the Me'ah Pama V'Achaz. I'm going to go back to that later. I talked to you before about the 101 times. I'm leaving that alone right now. I brought it in from later in the Pedic. We're going to revisit it, not today, but a different week, perhaps next week. Now we have to understand that there's the Beinoni that's Avodah and the Beinoni that's Le'Avodah. And the Alter Rebbe is going to give us more than one scenario for the Beinoni that's Le'Avodah and more than one scenario for the Beinoni that's Avodah. But the continuation for the Perek before is what I said, that this is the Shvuah of the Hitzadik, which is in addition to the Shvuah of Alter Hirosh. So let's read a little bit inside. Abisel. Says the Alter Rebbe, but Beinoni is Gam Kin Shtei Madregas. In Beinoni also there's two types, there's two steps. There's Avodah, there's Eved Elikim, the Beinoni who's in the middle of working towards Elikim, not Havaya, because he's not an Eved, he's an Eved. He's not a slave, he's slaving. He's not a servant, he's serving the Eibishter. And then there is the Asher Lei Avodah, a Beinoni who is not struggling. That doesn't make him Tarosh. In his entire life, he didn't miss out a single Aved, to do a single Aved, didn't do a single Aved. He did every single mitzvah he had an obligation to do that he was able to do. Including Talmud Torah. Now Talmud Torah, depending on the person, could be as much as some people, the Chiyuv of Talmud Torah, right? What did Rabbi Korf say? 24 hours. He said it so precious. So I was a leftist. What's a shliach? 24 mitzvahs. Every day of the week, every week of the year, every year of your life. This is a yid. Someone in Florida told me he's a very critical boss. But you can't possibly get upset at him because there's not a thing in the world that he demands from you that he doesn't demand from himself 10 times. He's like, you work for the Rebbe for 60 years. You become a melech. All of that whole generation, the shluchim from that time, whatever they were when they got married and they were ganz feinig tiddish and like that, now they're generals. You know, you become, your whole Metzias becomes Oboida. So the Rebbe says, imagine a yid who's so precise, he's so complete in his Beinoni yud that even when it comes to Talmud Torah, that the Chazal say Sholosh Avedas Einam Nitam B'Cholim, there's 3 Avedas that nobody misses on every day, and one of them is Bittul Torah, and this Beinoni Ein Bo Yafilu of a Bittul Torah, the very first page of the Tanya, it puts it in. He's not a bit of Bittul Torah, which is Talmud Torah Geneged Kulam, and he's not fighting. How could a human being have a Yetzer Hara? And he's not fighting with his Yetzer Hara. And he's never done an Aveda in his life, including the Aveda of Bittul Torah. How could such a thing be? So the Rebbe spells it out for you. Well, a Pasuk, Puma Megir says, never stop learning for a minute. So why is he called Le'Avodah? Or how could he possibly be in a state of Le'Avodah if he's so perfect in his Avedas Hashem? El the Teretz is, he's not at war. He's not fighting with himself. With his Yetzer Hara, to conquer it, or him. Al Yedei Era Deshem, to the light of the Eibishter. Hamer, which shines al nefesh or lekis shemameach, over the divine soul which is in his mind, hashalat al alev, which then rules over his heart. Kanal, as we discussed in the previous structure. Rabbi say meyach shalit al alev is leiv, right? Moyach shalit al alev is leiv. I explained this to you a long time ago. Moyach shalit al alev doesn't mean the mind controls the heart. Moyach shalit al alev means the mind teaches the heart. How do I know that? It says in the end of the first Ma'amid Hemshechayim Beis. In other words, you can translate the word Moyach shalit al alev in 2 different ways. The way we translate it usually, Moyach shalit al alev means the mind controls the heart, like discipline, like self-control, like mind over matter, and so on. But the higher translation of Moyach shalit al alev is that the mind is controlling the heart, the mind is educating the heart. Therefore, the cup, bagreift, feel the heart, like the Meister of Zalman says in it. What the mind understands, the heart feels. So Moyach shalit al alev is an emotional avoid. Now, how does emotions come to a Beinoni? We said in the previous page that the definition of a Beinoni is Davar Sheni Masal Alev. He's not visible with Lev. And the tenet is, and we also looked at last week, because when they gave you the shvur, they gave you a double shvur. They didn't only give you and me the shvur of Alta Hirasha, they also gave you and me the shvur of Tehid Tzadik, which means you have to do Avedas HaTzadikim. Avedas HaTzadikim is Me'ach Shalat HaLev. Maybe not always, but from time to time. Okay? No, and this Beinoni, because there's Eir Hashem HaMeir Anav Shalikis, because of Me'ach Shalat HaLev, is not fighting with himself. He's not struggling. In that state, it's not hard for him. Why? Mipnei she'ein yitzrei emed lenegdei klal. The Yetzer Hara isn't standing up to him at all. Kiva and Jehu, because I'm on top of page 41, second. There's a series of character traits, a series of midas that when joined together produce a person that's called a Benyan Yitzleavad. And he lists the three characteristics. Number one, Masmir Bilimudei Betive Bitodas. He's a bookworm. He likes to read books by nature. Most of our children have hyperactivity. They can't resist. Every once in a while, I'm a Rav in a shul. Because I invaded a shul. I became the rabbi, and they haven't yet thrown me out, so I'm still there. So a younger man comes in. He doesn't normally daven. What a boy, must be 11. In mitten davening, he came in for a kiddush. He probably didn't live in the shul. He came in for a kiddush. The boy sits down in a chair, in the middle of the room, facing in the wrong direction, picks up a book and starts reading. He read through Chazal Sashat of Shachris, and Kriyas Satere, and Maftir, and the Drasha. The kid didn't move. The concentration was remarkable. With a room full of people, there's things going on, and he's just not aware. So I said to his father, your son is suffering the same disease you have. He's an intellectual. In America, Baklal, and in Lubavitch, Befrat, we hate smart people. We absolutely hate smart people. Why? Because they're not cool. This kid is a brain. But a kid concentrated like that, it was remarkable to see. He walked into the shul, it wasn't his shul, he came in for a kiddush. Some people have that gift. They're book people. I've had students like that, not a lot, but occasionally come across them. They take to Sfarim and to Torah like a fish to water. Most of the kids can't sit for 2 seconds. And they have no concentration, they have no interest. But some are, and for some people it's not a struggle. This is who they are. I had a friend when I was 11. He grew up on Shlichus, and he was boarding in Crown Heights, and he was in my class. He was 11 years old. He used to read encyclopedia like a kid reads comics. Mamish. It was the biggest joke. Encyclopedia. You know what encyclopedia is? Double column, small words, very few pictures, and he'd read like this. And we all laughed at him until we tested him. He knew every word. I mean, he was a real genius. There was a rachmanas on him. We had so much fun at the poor guy's expense. Why? Because we were a bunch of shayim, you understand. But he was for him to read a book is like for another kid, forgive me for saying it in a shul, to watch a movie. This was his teva. It wasn't hard. It's still not hard. I mean, he's a genius. He didn't become, he's genius. He's a classmate of mine. I had a guy in Shikop. And it's his personality. It's not just that he's very, very bright, but he doesn't struggle. It's not hard. You put him in front of a book and the world, literally, you'll drop a bomb, he won't hear. Such masmid bilimudei b'tiv. If a person is diligent in his learning, because it's its nature, mitodase from his birth, and Alter Rebbe qualifies it, al yedei tagbeira samarash chayra. A human being has a personality. And according to Helik Sfarim, I don't know what Sfarim it is, I don't know if it's Chazal or it's Kabbalah Sfarim, one of the ways to define the person is called the Mora. What is the gallbladder? I don't know the biology, and it doesn't matter at the moment, the biology, but I'll be tated as a Mora Shchera, and a Mora Levona, and a Mora Yeruka, and a Mora Aduma. That there's 4 gallbladders. There's a black one, and a white one, and a red one, and a green one. As far as I know, they're all green and yellow, as far as I know, physically. A gallbladder. But Teda speaks of Mara Shchera, Mara Levana, Mara Yeruka, Mara Duma. A black Mara, a white Mara, a yellow or a green Mara. Yorek is the same word for yellow and green. It's a problem. There's no 2 words for yellow and green. That's why you have in Yiddish, gel. Because Yorek means yellow and green. It's the same color of potato and red. People who have these gallbladders, again, whether they're physical or they're spiritual, have certain personality traits. And you have to understand, personality traits are part of the teva, the nature of a person. Meaning you didn't deserve it, you didn't earn it, you didn't work on it, it's how God made you. And teva, usually, there's a rare exception, which we're going to get to in Pedikites, teva is linked to the word klipa. It's my limitation. It's my box. It's my criteria. Just like you have people who are very happy and very free, they're also very socially comfortable, and they're very generous. This is their teva. You have people whose teva is, they're very, very controlled, and they're very, very exact, and they're very, very precise, and they're very, very and they're book people. Their lives are they're intelligent, and they're introverts. These personality types go together. Alter Rebbe says, no, avoid here, I didn't work on this. This is what the Eibishter made. The Eibishter made a human being who has a concentration. The Eibishter made a person that betive is a masmid. I've had such students. I had once a student who had a hard time hearing, never. And you put him in a room with Sfarim, and until you woke him up, he sat there. And I always thought to myself, I wish this kid would be able to hear all the shtusman going around him and not read so much books. But today he's a grown man, he's a big lampen. I always associated the two together. I think there's a connection. In other words, he didn't hear. He had a difficulty socializing, he couldn't hear. So he went into the books he could hear. And when he was in a book, what was going on around him. So the word teva has to indicate that it's the real alternative word to the word teva is the word klipa. But we always know that klipa was evil. I don't want to use klipa as evil. I want to use klipa as a containment, as a box, as a form, like a shell. Inside this shell, you have a certain set of character traits. One of them is a master. If a person is a master of the Lud you're not going to give him credit for being a big Talmud Chacham, a big scholar, a big reader, because this is the nature the Eibishter gave. So he could be a Beinani with a Yetzer Hara. If he's a master of the Lud the Yetzer Hara cannot touch his diligence, because it's his nature. In other words, the Yetzer Hara is diligent. And the Alter Rebbe continues. V'chein, in addition, I'm 3 lines from top of page 41 now, page Chafal Chamer Aleph. The lust, the temptation that so many people suffer from Taivas Nashim, he doesn't have either. He's a dispassionate person. And because he's dispassionate, he just doesn't have the normal lust that people have. That means probably mostly food and clothing. And some people need physical things to be a certain way. And they enjoy taivas, food and clothing. They matter to them a lot. And if things are not the way they're supposed to be, it bothers them. When somebody has something they don't have, they're jealous. And it distracts them. It occupies them. If this person is a metzud, mechused, the other place of world, I'm continuing to read. By nature, he lacks the field that gives pleasure for all kinds of other things, by nature. So if you have all 3 together, you're a Beinani with the Yetzer Hara, and you never fight a day in your life. The Eibishter made you in such a way that your nature is disposed towards doing meaningful things. You're not fighting. You're a Beinani. But you're not an Oived. Because there's no Muhammad. There's no war.
What is Yetzer Hara?
Yetzer Hara is preventing you from hating evil. The definition of a tzaddik is that he hates evil. This person's Yetzer Hara he's indifferent to evil, but he doesn't have a dislike for it. Because of the Yetzer Hara. The tzaddik, to the degree that he's a tzaddik, he loves Hashem and hates evil. This person doesn't love Hashem, he doesn't hate evil, just following his personality. Okay? So the Rebbe continues, for such a person, such a person does not need to contemplate so much. The greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To bring forth from his understanding, Ruach Das v'yiras Hashem, a spirit of knowledge and fear of God Almighty in his mind, in his brain. L'ishama, to be careful, not to transgress one of the negative commandments. V'avas Hashem believe in all of Hashem of his heart. Notice that by Yira he said the word Mayach, and by Av he says the word Leiv, whatever that means. L'davka by to remain attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'kiyim ha-mitzvahs and doing mitzvahs, including Talmud Torah. So if he was not a master b'tivi, if he was not muchot ha-hegesh ha-noah b'tivi, if he was a mitzvanim b'tivi, he'd have to fight. But because he has all of these 3 character traits together, the combination of master b'tivi, mitzunim b'tivi, and mechus ha-hegesh ha-noah b'tivi puts him into a place where he does the right thing and doesn't do the wrong thing, and is completely dispassionate. He's a Beinani, but he's not an Oived. To him it's enough, the hidden love. Which is the heart of the collective Jew, and you already know that any time the word collective Jew comes up, we had this in Perek Yudalot, in the previous Perek. It means Yechida. Which you call the lovers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, you can't call this person a server, a laborer. He's not an Eved, not a tzaddik, but he's not an Oived either, he's not fighting. There's no Muhammad. Says the way this hidden love affects him is not something that he has to invoke or arouse or inspire at all. By him the hidden love remains in a hidden state. It remains in the state of Yerusha. They have been saying from our ancestors. The collective Jew, we'll see it later, and in Perek Mamalef and in Perek Memdalet. We also had it in Perek Yudalot before. The Kol Yisrael, the collective Jew. But the bottom line is, there are some people who could be Beinoni, with a Yetzer Hara, they're not fighting anybody. Now I want to tell you, I'm stopping in the middle of a sentence. I'm not stopping in the middle of a paragraph, I'm stopping in the middle of a sentence. Next week we're going to review this and go weiter. Okay, so what we started today's class was first of all the difference between Eved Hashem and Eved Elokim. Eved Hashem is Madregas Tzaddik, we're not discussing that. Eved Elokim is Madregas Beinoni, we're discussing that. And we're contrasting Eved to Lo Yavodah. So the first thing I told you is what the Alter Rebbe is going to say last. It's the 101 times. But then the Alter Rebbe moves on to give us the first model of Lo Yavodah. The first model of Lo Yavodah, the person has a series of tiviyim, a series of nature. And because of these series of natures, he can be a Beinoni and never fight with the Yetzer Hara. We'll review this, we'll talk about it more. We'll move on to the next Madreg of Lo Yavodah, B'li Neder, V'ez Hashem Yisbarach, next Sunday. Thank you all for coming. We'll take a little break, and then we're going to learn with Hashem's help, Hayem Yem.